Hi, good afternoon. As Emily said, my name is Kierra Davis. I'm the development lead currently, but I've also been our outreach and communications coordinator. There's currently two of us at MWCC, so I still do a lot of communications as the development lead. A little more about our organization. MWCC has been the statewide organization supporting local watershed conservation since 1994. We represent roughly 60 watershed groups, collaboratives, conservation districts across Montana. I personally have been working on and off for MWCC since 2017. I was a Big Sky Watershed Corps member, outreach and communications coordinator, and now development lead. So, something really important for us is this term that we have coined called the watershed approach. And you can see some of our tenants here. Well, all of the tenants here. We created this at an annual meeting with partner input and feedback. We find having this shared vision helps us better articulate the values that our groups have and be able to represent and support their efforts. We check in every so often with our groups to make sure that these values still align with theirs. And our communications through this approach help build support and visibility for our groups on the ground. So, one of our first programs that we do to help communicate for groups is called #Watershed Summer. It came out of a summer when I was the only staff part-time and working from Kentucky in the Eastern time zone. I wanted something to do that, would further the outreach abilities of our groups while not putting capacity strain on them. So I decided, even though we didn't have much of a social media following yet, being able to work with groups to create social media posts and share that out for them would provide capacity and representation. My process looked a little bit like asking them to sign up. So it was, something that they wanted to do. Not everyone was just automatically included. They needed to, partake. I then sent out directions on what I needed from them, asking them to write up what they thought would be good social media posts and sending me photos that went with those posts. I then worked on their drafts and made edits and sent them back. For some groups, we did that several times. And then I would post the social media and try to tag their accounts if they had one. So you can see here on the right-hand side an example of what the final product looked like. In 2023, we started with 25 organizations being represented. At the end, we averaged out to reach 139 accounts and have 11 interactions per post. Now, last year in 2025, we went up to 35 organizations represented. We reach about 275 accounts per post with 10 interactions. So it's been pretty good. We're improving every year. And then at the end, I like to check in with everybody and I send them this survey and ask how they think the campaign went. We've had responses ranging from, I felt like it was great, I had support, the whole process went well. A direct quote from one, it might be helpful for next year's campaign if you shared posts or content that did particularly well the year before, as examples. Or I think it would be beneficial to spread the posts out over several days instead of posting them all in the same day. We might get more engagement that way. So I've been collecting that feedback and changing things up every year that we've hosted this. We plan on doing this again in 2026. And to take it even further, last year we tried to connect what we were doing online with in person. And so we held a cornhole tournament in Helena. We coined it Cornhole for Clean Water and tried to celebrate what all of our groups were doing on the ground in person. And it went really well. So we're hoping to have that again this year, and we're going to try to have it in Missoula. More details to follow. Our other program that we do is our State of the Watersheds report. This has been going on for quite a while. We created this as a resource to share out the successes and to describe to decision makers, primarily, just how much work watershed groups and conservation districts are doing. This product helps showcase our network's collective impact on the waters in Montana and share the group priorities and have those people understand geographically where things are happening. So this on the right-hand side is one of the pages out of our State of the Watersheds report. Typically, we do this every other year, and we try to have it prepared in time to distribute during the legislative session. Beyond decision makers, this report is important to share with potential funders, to demonstrate our collective successes, future priorities, and create more demand for the good projects that these groups are doing on the ground and can complete with proper funding. Some simple takeaways that we try to live by is making sure that you have enough time to properly communicate, because we're busy, they're busy. It takes time to get to a good product, and being open to feedback and criticism, and then innovating and experimentation. So I've changed the watershed summer every time we've done it, trying to make it better. And that's all I have for today. Feel free to reach out with any questions or to talk to me about anything.
Kierra, I'm curious when you're trying to put together your annual report, how you coordinate getting that information from everybody. Like, do you guys have a form? How are you guys doing that?
Yeah, so the State of the Watersheds is a little different than our annual report. Annual report for us is just our personal organization. The State of the Watersheds report takes a lot of communication. I personally have not been extremely involved in the past. We're starting the process now, and so this will be my first time working on it. I know that we have sent out surveys in the past to groups. It's been really hard to get people to complete it because it is so long and detailed. Amy and I have been discussing different ways to make it more palatable, like breaking it up into a couple different surveys over a different time frame. We're working towards hopefully providing like a stipend for people who fill it out to, acknowledge the time that it takes for them to get all that information together and give it to us. In the past, it's just been a lot of like sending out the survey, making a phone call, sending out the survey again, making another phone call. Like, can you please fill it out? I don't think we've ever been able to completely represent everyone, but we've always had a majority of the groups.
Yeah, I can imagine just the wrangling that needs to happen is probably the biggest workload with a product
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's always like communications. In the past, we've hired a designer to put it all together for us. So that communication is always interesting too.
Dolly, I think we'll turn it over to you.
Hi everybody. Daly Edmunds. Work for Regional Office of National Audubon Society, and as a regional office, we cover Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. So, as was noted in the chat box, I hope to see a lot of you all in Fort Collins. It's a great town. So today, just wanted to share a little bit about how our office engages on storytelling when we're part of a larger organization. So just to kind of an expectation for today, I'm going to go through these slides fairly fast, but wanted to give you an experience about some grounding about who National Audubon Society is, and how we leverage our communications and our strengths, and then go a little bit into Audubon Rockies and share with you two example stories. One is perfect because it talks about waters as well, the Western Rivers initiative, which is in Colorado specifically, and then a larger geography campaign around the sagebrush ecosystem. So to give you a sense about Audubon, National Audubon Society has been around for about 120 years. We have a really large staff, almost 900 folks. That includes seasonal staff. And we're distributed primarily in North America, in the US. We have 15 state and regional offices. And we also have conservation, action centers, and sanctuaries, 55 of those. And also, when we're talking about National Audubon Society, we are different from some of the other national organizations in that we have a lot of folks that we engage with. We have about 1.9 million supporters, and those are folks that we have email addresses for, can engage on them. They care about birds, and we are obviously very bird focused. And we have about 400,000 members who donate to us as well. And Audubon also has the opportunity to be able to have 400 chapters across the country. These are community chapters. They are their own organization, but then we also have campus chapters. And why this is important in storytelling is the ability to reach more folks and have more folks talking about an issue that we're working on. Our programs focus on really 4 different areas, whether it's habitat conservation, climate work, policy, or community building. And through our communications, communications is woven through all of these, and these are targeted towards inspiring, influencing, and ultimately achieving our goals. The idea is if they don't know, they can't care, and they can't take action. So we have some primary ways of engaging. We have a Facebook following of about 1.2 million members. They reach about 4.1 million each week. And then going into sending order, we have about 400,000 Instagram followers and fewer than that others. But we also have an email, and that's how we engage with newsletters. We also have a national magazine. So it is a real strength of Audubon's. And when we think about a regional office, I cover Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Our work encompasses all of those. And when I talk to you about what we're doing today, I'm not going to cover any of our 6 programs except for these 2. Again, the Western Rivers Initiative and the Sagebrush Ecosystem. And both of these programs, again, cover all of those primary areas of focus for National Audubon Society. And what's interesting as we talk about these is that the Western Rivers is very focused on Colorado. We work on the Colorado River, which runs through 7 states, whereas Sagebrush Ecosystem encompasses 13 states, and so that's going to be a larger example that we'll cover today. And in all of these work, we look at the ecological value of the area, we consider the climate impacts, we use the best available science, and then really importantly for this group, we want to engage the public, members, and decision makers to have good conservation outcomes. With all of these, it's a lot of work to figure out what's the landscape look like, what's the political landscape look like, what's the science landscape look like. We have to work with existing partners and coalitions to understand what is Audubon Rockies or National Audubon Society's value in this. And we need to think about the decision makers and those that we can influence. In all of this, we really have to work with our regional and national communication staff, as well as our issue experts. We look at messaging strategy, who are trusted messengers, what terminology is not effective, and work together to figure out what are good tactics to influence who those decision makers are. And ultimately, I'm going to share with you how ridiculously complex a national organization like Audubon is, and how we have to work across multiple layers. And we want to ultimately work together to be able to make sure that we have accurate, effective messaging and tactics. And we really draw on both internal and external expertise for all of these. So this graphic really just shows the org chart for our marketing and communication staff. What's not captured here, but is extremely important, really is the anchor to a lot of the work that we do. Our 15 state and regional offices are our communication staff. But I shared this not to know exactly who the names are, but how complex it is. Those in circles are who we have worked with on those other two examples that I'm sharing. So that first example is going to look at Colorado, and it's the Western Rivers Program. And this is work that my colleague Abby Burke has really led. And so she graciously shared some slides with me so I could share that story. And when we think about why is Audubon interested in this water issue in Colorado, it's because they are so essential for birds. They really play an outsized role of importance for avian species and for wildlife in general. So we got involved because in 2023, Supreme Court really narrowed the protections associated with the Clean Water Act. And this is really a problem because nearly 2/3 of the waterways in Colorado lost their protection. So states at this point were faced with a choice. Do we engage? Do we not engage? And in fact, it was let's engage. We have to engage. We have to think about what is our value. So there is so much more that needs to be done than any one of us can do individually. So we're surrounding ourselves with coalitions, as was just mentioned earlier, really with strategic partners and skill sets. And we're trying to figure out how can Audubon contribute to this effort. And then we're developing strategy. And when I'm saying strategy, it's from the communications standpoint, it's from the policy standpoint, it's internal expertise and external, such as coalitions, to figure this out. And what I really love about the story, the work that Abby has done, is that it really starts with the people and had some positive policy outcomes. And a good point she's always said is conservation works when people can see their place in the solution. So, for example, when there was weakened protections for the state of Colorado, and the Colorado legislature debated getting involved in creating some statewide protections, we decided not to go to the lawmakers to talk about it, but instead purposely went and talked to Coloradans and asked them the very simple question of what's your wetland? These responses had no legal arguments to it. It was simply a way to build personal connections to specific landscapes. And many of us know that we care about specific places. So this is our effort to capture that. People talked about the birds they love, water they depended on, ranches they stewarded, rivers they recreated on. Ultimately, 62 stories. And it did something really critical. It shared an understanding of the importance of this issue. It made the issue visible. So we shared this story map with legislators and kind of built a drumbeat around the need for conservation and action to protect Colorado's waters. So a bill was introduced in 2024, and this was incredibly contentious. There were over 240 lobbyists engaged in this. So it was tough. But again, what was great about Audubon is that we were able to work with partners and bring on-the-ground voices into the conversation and bring the science into it as well. And so we were able to connect these folks and do the building outreach to legislators, did informational blogs, and part of the storytelling of breaking down the complex issue for the layperson to understand and providing them opportunities to engage the public. And again, this is where our communications team was amazing in that they were able to provide ways that people could sign petitions, people could contact their legislators. People felt like they were able themselves to share their voice in this issue. In the end, 12 people actually went out of their comfort zones and provided testimony in front of the state legislators. So that was fantastic. And what are the lessons learned? Well, the bill passed, which was amazing. Colorado was the first state in the nation to pass legislation that addresses the stream and wetlands protection gap that was created by the weakened Supreme Court law. And in fact, it's actually stronger than the national law because it includes protections for wetlands. Over 1 million acres of wetlands and more than 250,000 miles of stream across Colorado. Some of the takeaways: engaging early and often, and really using science-based languages when talking to decision makers. Switching gears now to a larger landscape, now talking about the sagebrush ecosystem and what we did in this space. This ecosystem is really large. It's actually North America's largest contiguous ecosystem. It encompasses 13 states. It's a very vulnerable ecosystem, very dry, arid, high elevation, and it has really long been undervalued. So we have, unlike where we talk about water, the old saying is whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. The sagebrush ecosystem is a landscape that has really been long time known as a flyover country, really inadequate protections for it, and inadequate recognition of its ecological and economic importance to the West. So when we take a look at this landscape, we see that most of it is actually managed by the federal government, and then next we have private lands. We decided to take a look, as in we're with a bird organization, so we took a look at an indicator species for this ecosystem, and it's the greater sage-grouse. And it is managed by the states, but the habitat, as we saw earlier, is managed primarily by the federal government. This species has been declining for a long time. It's been petitioned numerous times for ESA protections. The two most are shown on your screen here. And unlike a lot of species of conservation concern, we actually have an enormous amount of scientific knowledge that can help us manage this bird. Some of that scientific knowledge has shown some alarming declines in recent years. Documented 80% decline of the bird across its range. And while some folks may argue, oh, it's cyclical, it goes up one year, goes down the next. Well, it is a consistent decline across the range. And again, if you remember the ESA listing threats, that's still out there. People are very aware of that. Now, because this bird reflects the habitat, they are dependent on the sagebrush ecosystem for all phases of their life. And what we're seeing is a dramatic loss. And in a paper that came out a couple of years ago, found that there's actually losing about 1.3 million acres of functioning sagebrush habitat. One of the big reasons are cheatgrass. So you have images here of cheatgrass coming in, being aggressive, invasive, and outcompeting your native plants. And once you get that cheatgrass in, you start to have a lot less ability for the sagebrush to survive. In all of this, you're seeing I'm showing a lot of pictures. That's one of the storytelling efforts, is we want to be able to have folks understand about this landscape. Because it is so remote, most people can't experience it themselves. As we talk about the sagebrush ecosystem, it's been really fun for Audubon to work with a wide range of partners, because while we're looking at it through the lens of the bird, other entities are very interested in maybe the sportsman community for what these lands support for big game. You also have other organizations that are just looking at the habitat itself. You also have ranchers. So there's a lot of partners involved in this conversation. But it was really alarming in that Audubon has a strong education team, and some of our educators in Wyoming were recognizing that some of the students, where there's the largest amount of sagebrush habitat, could tell you more about the rainforest than what's in their own backyard. So we started this really big education campaign, one of the first in the country, that created some resources to connect people to the landscape, including this awesome children's resource. We also worked with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. This is all trying to build awareness and understanding of this ecosystem, and they ultimately spent a year and developed this amazing movie, a documentary on the landscape that went out on PBS Nature and really reached a lot of folks. We also took advantage of the skill sets we had within our own Audubon Rockies staff. And so while this is a national issue, our staff is our real leaders in that. And we created some some short videos. Again, people need to understand this landscape. Most people don't. They don't understand how it affects the people involved. So we created short documentaries that connected the folks to the landscape with visual, auditory, experiences that they could help to understand what even public lands are, as many in the US don't understand that. All of this work was pretty amazing. We actually had Leonardo DiCaprio did a social media post on sage grouse. It was pretty wild. So at a time when you would have most folks have no idea what a sage grouse was, all of a sudden the nation got a lot of attention around it. And you had all these opinion pieces going out talking about the sagebrush and the sage grouse. You also had a lot of Audubon utilized, our communicators used our communication spaces to engage folks and be able to help them understand why this area is valuable and what people can do to make sure that it is around for future generations. So with that, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daly.
Hi, Daly. It's good to see you. Her and I got to work together a long time ago, so this is fun. And I have a question about how maybe you have felt stressors or decision-making struggles with top-down versus bottom-up needs, like satisfying major needs and pushes at the national level versus maybe what chapters could be clamoring for.
So, yes. There's a lot of pull and push of direction on how to spend our efforts. And I think that has resulted in a lot of conversations internally about how does this work broadly fit into Audubon's mission and what expertise can we bring to the table. And as we've had these conversations, we've been able to identify how can we leverage our relationship with our chapters to have on the ground experiences and comments. Our chapters lead lectors, for example, so we're able to have them engage with their members and send people their way on these lectors. We have them engaging, our chapter leaders engaging on testimony at the state legislatures. So we are able to utilize those relationships at different scales.
Yeah, I think so. I guess I was also wondering because the sage grouse makes sense. Like it's such a broad landscape that I would imagine a lot of chapters are very concerned about it. But I'm wondering maybe if a chapter has a super local issue, if they ever are like, why aren't you spending time on this? Or could you help us? And if it's hard for you guys to find capacity, if they ask for specific help.
Yes, there are expertise within our chapters. For example, I know one of our chapters has like retired state game and fish agency directors on their board. So like just amazing assets within their own individual 501c3 organizations. And one of the chapters that I'm thinking of has done a lot of work that looks at the value of some of the native forbs to sage grouse that we often don't think about, not always just the sagebrush, but these other species, the understory that's of real value. And so we took some of their expertise and included them in some national technical comments that were submitted for the entire ecosystem. And what's really hard is that this ecosystem varies from one end. What you see in Washington is very different from what you see in Colorado. So yeah, taking all that into account and basically listening to the chapters and engaging them where we're able to. And there's been a lot of efforts where we're able to do like joint sign-on letters, etc. So yeah, it's been really, really good.
Hey, thanks, gals. I had a question for both of you, and thinking about some bigger communications endeavors that I'm looking at. Just when you're bringing all these cooks in the kitchen to do these big, big efforts, I'm curious if you guys can think of any tips or tricks, or I wish I would have at the beginning of some of these large projects to make them successful at the end, or if there's anything you didn't do that you wish you would have just early on in the developmental phase of these things to make sure that they're successful and have big impact.
I can jump in with one. There was an event that we hosted with several other NGO partners, and it was on a private ranch in Wyoming, and we had all these special invite guests coming to really experience the connection of private lands and their role in sagebrush ecosystem management. And there was several of us that were leading in the organization of it. And at the last minute, I got COVID and I wasn't able to attend. And so it killed me all that time of planning and not being able to celebrate with everybody and see the fruition of our work. But one of the lessons learned is planning if anybody isn't there. And in hindsight, if I would have loved to have made it really clear and had a conversation about who's taking photographs and what kind of photographs do we need? Because afterwards you download and you're like, oh, and doing some advanced discussions around what kind of products do you want to create post event, and that can help backtrack of what you really need to collect.
Yeah, my thoughts were very similar in that making sure that there's clear expectations for all parties involved, including myself. I know with some of our stuff, we've kind of flown by the seat of our pants in a way. It has to do with that time management, like I mentioned, and definitely setting expectations and being clear and having it in writing is always helpful, something to be able to go back and look at.
Really good. I have so many things with this project I'm working on. I'm like, ooh, I need to design a number two. Ooh, I need to get those expectations in writing. Ooh, we need to talk about post-delivery products. So thank you.
I have a question for you both, thinking about how you've collected a lot of these voices that are, local voices, whether that's through the Watershed Summer or when you were getting people to answer the question, what is their watershed? How did you, I guess, if you had any like tensions between the different messages that you were collecting, how did you try to build consensus among the groups and among the people who were sharing their stories to develop that shared messaging that you then shared widely?
You want to take it, Kierra? And I can follow up.
Sure. So I think for us, we do have a very wide range of organizations that we represent. And honestly, with Watershed Summer, it was pretty easy because I was basically doing it like a social media takeover. Like it was their words and like their organization. It was just on our platform in a way. So it was pretty easy to be like, this is what they think, this is what represents them. With our State of the Watersheds report, it's a little more combining all the data and just sharing that, not so much the words. There has been a lot of discussion about our watershed approach, and especially the part about litigation. And that's something that like we're still playing with, like is groups are moving and changing, and we're not sure where we're going with that yet.
A lot of the work, both projects that I kind of shared today, as well as in a lot of other spaces, is coalition based. And so we visit with other organizations and have some really good and valuable conversations about what our messaging is going to be. And then every organization will walk away and put their own twist to it. Like ours has to have a bird type thing connection to it. So I think there's that trust that has been built up in those coalitions to share the best available information, as far as also who's not going to be an effective messenger. There's times when maybe Audubon shouldn't be speaking up, but we can help on the brainstorming. There's also, I think the trust is huge, and I think the ability to always keep each other in the loop so nobody feels blindsided is a real important one. And I would say, as you're talking about like the messengers and the work that we get from folks, I feel like we all are on real crunch deadlines and we're trying to think of and utilize a specific tactic, and then we're off to the next part of our strategy. And I'm not always great about, and I'm trying to get better about making sure that those folks that have stepped up and shared their local voice, their story, their message that is important to them, that they get thanked and are kept aware of what is happening in the larger project. Abby Burks work on the Colorado River part. She was phenomenal about always keeping those champions aware of what's happening and sending them an updated blog that she was doing. And so people felt that they continued to get appreciated and in the loop. And so when they were asked to engage again, they felt comfortable and willing to take part of their time to do so.
Thank you both so much. And I really appreciated you bringing up how important relationships are in building these shared communications. And my follow-up question to that is, for once you've established, these different coalitions and collaborative campaigns, is there any advice you would give to folks on when you're bringing in new partners into something that's already been established, to bring them up to speed or help bring them into the fold so that they can get on board with shared messaging that maybe they weren't there to help establish at the beginning?
From my perspective in the work that I've done for greater sage grouse and the sagebrush ecosystem, we have an established group, and before anyone else gets brought in, everybody has to agree with that entity coming in. So there's a shared buy-in and support for having, and if there's any red flags, then we are able to talk that through. And there is that personalized touch of one of us reaching out to that new entity and giving a lay of the land so they kind of know what they're getting into, and are in agreement of what the history is and what our roles are and are not. So, ensuring that there's communication with the existing members, coalition members, and then clear communication with the incoming potential partner. Can I ask a question of the group, actually?
Please do.
I'm curious, whenever I watch a presentation that others give, I'm like, oh, I'm surprised they didn't mention this, or how about that? I'm kind of curious, as folks heard Kierra and I talk today, if there are points where you're like, huh, I've had a different experience, or I wonder if this happened, but they just didn't mention it, type thing. Like one of the things that I was thinking about is pulling together this presentation is thinking about, as we're doing storytelling, measuring effectiveness. So hard, especially if for those that are running on dollars from funders who want to know you have this amount of impact, and that's hard. So I was just curious that I didn't mention that because I wasn't sure how to determine effectiveness. So kind of curious if others have found that in their storytelling work, at different scales, if they've been able to determine, yes, this worked.
Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to share your experience with this or try to add your 2 cents to the evaluation of collaborative campaigns?
This is not at all talking about evaluation. So please interrupt me if anybody has something to say about evaluation. But Daly, one thing to answer your kind of original question that didn't get mentioned at all today that I'm curious from both of you guys is the capacity issue. I think for many, many organizations, and I know both Audubon and MWCC, you guys have very different looking communications capacity situations. So this is probably going to be different for both of you. But how do you balance these large campaigns with like different entities that do have varying levels of capacity, and like what's your thought process, and like how do you manage okay, this watershed group that's got one guy that's got like 6 different jobs, and I just know he's probably not going to be able to send me his numbers this year, or this chapter is always sending me stuff, and I want to make sure that voices have equal playing power. So I would love for both of you guys to just talk about how capacity plays a role in balancing the messages and the communications that you do.
So for us, it's a couple different ways. So personally, we don't have a lot of capacity as an organization. For us, I work part-time, Amy's full-time, that's all of our staff. That's it. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act. because some of our groups that we represent have significantly more capacity than we do. And so with those, luckily, most of the time I don't have to do a whole lot of work in terms of, their posts that they send me. It's already pretty polished and ready to go versus, some groups I have to email them a couple times and remind them like, hey, I need you to get me this information if you would like me to share it. And it gets to a point of, okay, I know this person needs more time to get stuff together, so I will put them later in the summer of the campaign to, have more time to get it together and also me have more time to edit it. It's just one of those things of being flexible.
And I think giving a heads up to folks in advance so they have time to collect it. Everyone has different styles. I like to cram everything at the end, and I have other colleagues and other partners who are like super good at keeping track of things. So I think just knowing the personalities of who you're working with, and when thinking about capacity, to your point, Kierra, I think there's such a differing level, and having those honest conversations up front has been helpful for us to be able to be like, all right, we can help in this way, making it those expectations really, really clear, and recognizing some folks are just going to take a heavier lift, but that doesn't negate the value of the others that don't because they have X and Y to contribute. So I think having those conversations of what everyone's going to be able to do is really, really nice. And recognizing that you may have different tiers of engagement and being okay with that.
Yeah, so much about just building those relationships and knowing the people you're working with through those relationships. That makes a lot of sense. Megan threw a comment in the chat just about evaluation and using the right metrics, whether it's quantitative number of people who engaged versus qualitative, how did the communications actually impact the people? Did you move people? Megan, please elaborate on that if you would like to, but really, really hard thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have much to add other than I think this is just the constant in when we engage with people, and I find that if there is a donor and they have certain metrics that they want to achieve, that isn't always what's moving the needle, and it's hard to communicate that and feel like you are empowered to say that. Like we're not going for the quantity here, we're going for the quality, and I find that dynamic for me it pops up more than I'd like it to. But this has been fantastic. I want to say that as I was listening, I didn't really see anything missing from your presentation. I was so wowed by the visuals and the pictures that distracted by that. It was so fantastic. Thank you.
I'm just curious if the group has any experience with this on the that after action review, that calculating that impact. And Laura, I'm kind of looking at you for your stories. Just the stuff that you put out and a couple of things that I can think about that have been really personal to the people speaking and telling the stories. That seems to make your impact, make your content resonate further. And that's kind of what you do. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. And I was gonna go after you just on this topic because this is something that, I come from the filmmaking background. So I direct Stories for Action, which we do short films, podcasts, story workshops, largely around collaborative and community-led approaches in the land and in rural and tribal communities. A lot of our work is grant funded, so we are forced to go into that kind of metrics for impact. And as a filmmaker, it can get very frustrating when we have to shoehorn the impact into things that like grants and other types of audiences want to see, which I understand why we have to do it. And I fought it for a long time, years, and I've really just learned that we also need to be okay with not having these nice, neat metrics of impact, and that can help to actually change the system that we're putting content into, instead of trying to be really frustrated to shoehorn it into that. How can all of us in the comms space try to shift that system? And I'm seeing funders that are starting to get it, policymakers that are starting to get it. It's largely qualitative, I think, is more important. because the quantitative, yes, you can get your numbers and your viewership. That's an easy way to get metrics. It does speak to people. It can be an impressive thing to put out there, but it's those quotes from people. I watched this and I called my rep. I watched this and I felt heard for the first time. I watched this and I felt seen for the first time. I saw someone who looks like me represented, or it's powerful, the direct quotes that you hear from people, or even comments that you see on social media or wherever it's posted for things like that. So collect all of those because that speaks really well for whoever you're trying to prove the value of the storytelling work to. And then also, what I think is the most important is the impact on the people and the stories who are featured. Whether it's a rancher who's finally getting, positive press about the stewardship of his land and not being villainized, like it's huge. And so to actually get the words from those people that are featured, I mean, I get emotional talking to people because of their emotions after they see their story represented. And even if it's on a story map or a video or a poster, or you spoke about their operation in a presentation you gave, like it seems simple maybe to a lot of folks. It's big for people who do this quiet work on a daily basis and don't get recognized. And then, sorry, hand it back to just the more personal things that we try to pull out. We know that's what connects with people. And when you're talking about the land, if you build that relationship and that trust with someone that you're speaking to about the work they do, it doesn't take much for them to open up on a very emotional level of how and why they do what they do to steward the land that they are part of. Like it's something that we just don't put those questions out to people enough or give them the opportunity to share that story enough. But you talk about people connected to the land, whether they're a rancher or a bird watcher. And it's just about giving them the opportunity and whatever your position is or entity you work for, helping to be that microphone for them to elevate that. So sorry, that was just like a lot of all over the place, but just we really need to lean into being okay with not having hard numbers and metrics. Use those. I know they speak to a certain demographic audience, but it's those quotes. And you have to, reach out to people and ask for them to get those, but start just creating a database of, even if it's the smallest little snippet of things, like collectively, you look at those all together at the end of your campaign and it's like, whoa, this is big. And complement that with the numbers and the viewership and that type of thing too.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really great and connected a lot of things that we've been talking about today. And just to build on that, thinking about the relationships that we're building through these projects, through these communication projects, and the partnerships we're building, and capturing over time how those relationships and deepening those relationships have an impact within our organizations and what our organizations are able to do together. Like what starts off as a one-off conversation can turn into a project, can turn into something even bigger over time. And I know those are really hard for funders to support because they think on such short time scales, but if we can have those conversations and show them through our stories how it builds over time, we can try to move the needle with our funders to get them to start thinking bigger picture as well and on longer time scales.